Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf memchet. Today's daf is sponsored by the Saslin family in loving memory of Rabbi Henry Saslin Zichrono Livracha. Dad, we strive every day to live by your values, especially your devotion to family, to learning, and to Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael Chai. Today's daf is sponsored by Judy Schwartz in honor of her beloved daughter Becky on her birthday. With love, gratitude, and appreciation for your very existence. May your journey into the world of Daf Yomi continue to give you knowledge, strength, and satisfaction of being part of an incredible Jewish learning endeavor. Okay, we're going to get started today. I'll just mention that later today, Rabbanit Shiur is going to go up specifically about the very beginning of our daf, about the issue of dibur, of speech, and the value of speech and the spoken word, how strong it is. And that's really where we're going to start. We in the middle of this machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about whether a very basic machloket, whether ma'ot or konot midoraita or not. That means when I pay money for a transaction, is that a done deal by Torah law? Just the rabbi said, well, we're not going to make that a done deal because maybe the produce that's in the seller's hands might start burning and the seller will say, oh, what do I care? It's not my stuff. Is it because of that? Or, right, is it by Torah law? It's clear that it doesn't work. And that we proved, Reish Lakish tried to prove yesterday from the psukim, miyad liyad, right, or miyad amitecha, that means it has to be passed, meaning the object, not the money. And that was Reish Lakish's approach. It doesn't really tell you in the Gemara what the basis for Rabbi Yochanan. Why does he think that money acquired by Torah law? So there's all deliberation about this. Some people say it's just logical. You would say you pay for something, it's a done deal. And that's just logic. But others try to bring psukim to try to prove. We're not going to go into it right now, though. So where were we? We were up to difficulties on Reish Lakish. We brought two difficulties against Reish Lakish. We're in the middle of the second one, which is our Mishna, right? And both were from our Mishna. One was Rabbi Shimon, where we just simply said, if you remember Rabbi Shimon, I'll just review this because we'll also make reference to this later today. Rabbi Shimon in the Mishna said, if you paid the money, you actually can't change your mind. The person who received the money can change their mind if they want, the buyer. So basically, if you're going to say that, it sounds like actually by Torah law it works, just we're going to, say that only one side can't change their mind. And then we said, yeah, well, in fact, the only real way to explain Rabbi Shimon is to say that Rabbi Shimon holds the ma'od or konot like Rabbi Yochanan. Again, he's before Rabbi Yochanan, but that he must hold by that same approach. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan, just to make it clear, Rabbi Shimon and Reish Lakish are mutually exclusive. Okay, they're not the same opinion. Then we're going to go to the next part of our Mishnah. About 4 lines from the bottom of Zion Amabed. I'll go back to where we ended yesterday. The Mishnah says, listen, if you don't keep your word, so technically, halachically, it's okay. But, and we'll have to explain what exactly this means, but let's just explain this is a curse. But they say that the one, God, basically, God, the one who gave punishments to the generation of the flood, or just the generation of the flood here, they quote, God will punish you, basically. A curse will come upon you. So if you say, makes sense then that you would get a curse. But if ma'od or not konot, how on earth could we curse you for this? Right? Amai kai ba'aval. Why would we curse you for not keeping your word? If there's no problem with it, then you shouldn't get cursed. To which they answer, mishum dvarim. Well, and this is why Rabbanit is going to talk about in Machshava Shniya, on second thought, about this concept of, well, you didn't keep your word. So now they say, ubidvarim mi kai ba'aval. Wait, but you don't get a Mishnah Para just for words alone. How do we know that? V'hatanya, it says in a braita that you don't. And here we're going to see it. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Afa pisha amru talit koneh dinar zahav ve'ein dinar zahav koneh talit. Even though we said that a talit, you pull the talit, that means you acquire the dinar, even though the dinar zahav, the money is still in the hands of the buyer, but you've acquired it. But ein dinar zahav koneh talit. But money doesn't affect a kinyan. Mikol makom kach halacha. It's a bit of a strange phrase. In any case, this is the law, meaning what we just said is the law. The rabbis can't insist on you keeping to your side of the deal because it's not really a deal. Aval amru, but they said, Misha para me'anshe dor mabul, me'anshe dor hapalaga, u'me'anshe stom v'amora, umi mitzrayim bayam. Okay, this is an elaborated version of ours. Doesn't just have the dor mabul, the generation of the flood, and the generation of the dor hapalaga, tried to build the tower to the heavens. Or me'anshe stom v'amora, okay, who did those terrible things, and mitzrayim bayam, the Egyptians who drowned in the water, apropos Pesach. Hu atili para, he will ultimately, right, punish Misha Eno maybe dibulo. Okay, now that's so far. I just want to point out, we're asking a question, Rabbi Shimon, I'm Reish Lakish from Rabbi Shimon. Now, wait a minute. Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold like Reish Lakish. Okay, but we're not asking a question on this first part, because this first part, according to Rabbi Shimon, is because by Torah law, ma'od or konot, okay? But what we're going to focus on is the second part of Rabbi Shimon. So even though Rabbi Shimon and Reish Lakish don't go together, which is why I wanted to start with that, but still in terms of whether ma'od or konot or not, but now comes Rabbi Shimon and talks about a different case that is just dibor by itself. If you just made a business arrangement, this happens all the time, right? You agreed to a business arrangement. What does everybody always say? Write it down, right? Get it in writing. Because in the end, words, you can go against them. So now you can change your mind, right? Or you don't have any proof, really. Now the braita says, according to Rabbi Shimon still, but it doesn't matter anymore, that's Rabbi Shimon, this is just trying to prove that by words alone, because this has nothing to do with the money acquiring debate, because we're not talking about money. Okay, so there's no kinyan, obviously, because all you did was just say, I commit to this. But what happens if you renege on the deal, though? You still spoke. Now, what did we say before? What were we trying to say? That speech, right? Because if ma'oder and non-konot, then really all you did was speak, right? Your agreement by agreeing to this deal. Now, you did pay money, but really it was your speech that did it, because money doesn't really count. And what did we say? You get a mishapara. So now the question is, what's it going to say in this braita? Now, the first part said you get a mishapara, but mishpara is just saying you get this curse. What if you change your mind about it? You renege on the deal. The rabbis will not be pleased with you. Now, the rabbis will not be pleased with you is not the same as you're going to get a curse. That's much less severe. So what do you see here? You don't get a mishpara for words. So how, if Reish Lakish holds, and here's the question back to Reish Lakish, if Reish Lakish holds that ma'od and kono, then really it's just your words, because the act of giving the money is really not important. And therefore, why are you going to get a mishpara? So we're back to questioning Reish Lakish from our Mishna. It doesn't make sense. And in fact, not only that, but our Rava pointed out, in case you didn't get this from the braita, but it's pretty clear, in other words, if you renege on a spoken deal, right, a deal you just agreed with, a verbal agreement, you're only going to get, okay, the rabbis aren't pleased with you, but you're not going to get this Misha Parami, blah, 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 is going to get you. Well, to which they answer, no. You're comparing two different things, really. Dvarim be'ika b'adayu ma'ot kai ba'aval. Dvarim be'leika b'adayu ma'ot lo kai ba'aval. In other words, Reish Lakish, or the Mishna, which we were questioning Reish Lakish from, Reish Lakish can say the following. The Mishna is talking about a case. It's true ma'od or not kodot, but you did still pay ma'od. You did some action. You had words with an action. Words with an action, even if the action doesn't have meaning that it's a done deal, okay, but it's still an action. You can't ignore that. That's not the same as just a verbal agreement without any transferring of money. So then you're going to have it very, okay, according to Reish Lakish, it's very clear. Pull the object, it's a done deal. You renege, right? You can't, basically. If, right, that's the end game. If you paid money and had a verbal agreement, right, or even not, but you paid money for it, obviously you had some sort of arrangement, right, assuming verbal payment with that. If you renege, you get a mishapara, you get this curse, which again, we'll see, maybe it's not a curse, but let's just call it a curse for now. And then the third option is, well, you just had a verbal agreement. Then we'll just say the rabbis are not going to be pleased with you, but it's not as severe. And then it all fits in with Reish Lakish. So we had two difficulties with Reish Lakish. that we started yesterday, and we resolved them both. Now we're moving on to a proof for Reish Lakish, and Rava is going to bring two proofs. I'm a Rava. Topic sentence. Kra umatnita mesea le Reish Lakish. Both a pasuk and a braita support Reish Lakish. Okay, the pasuk's going to be a little bit complicated, so patience till we get through the whole thing. It's going to take us at least, the next 15 lines or so, 20 lines. It's a long section. In order to understand this, first we're going to read the psukim in the Torah. We're reading from Vayikra chapter 5, verses 21, 23, and 24. And you'll be familiar with these psukim. We've seen them already. Nefesh ki techta, if you sin, umala mal ba'Hashem. This isn't laws of Me'ilah. This is just you did something bad against God. What did you do? Kichesh ba'amito b'pikadon, o b'tsumet yad, o b'gezel, o ashakat amito. 4 things. You denied owing someone money. Either a pikadon, you were watching something of theirs and you denied it, or tsumet yad, which we're going to define now. Gezel, you stole and you denied it, or ashakat amito, which we're going to see has to do with you didn't pay someone's salary. So these 4 things, you did something wrong, and what you end up doing is you basically lied under oath that you didn't owe this money when you really did. Then we're going to skip a pasuk, and then it says, and it turns out if you were guilty and you come and admit, I lied under oath. So you have to return. Let's go through. The gzela, okay, so we dealt with theft. Notice it's already out of order. Or you have to give the money that you owed for the salary. Or the pikadon that you were watching. Now you expect to, what's the 4th one going to be? Tsumet yad. But it doesn't say tsumet yad. Or to avida asher matzad. Adds this aveda case, and we don't really care that it's adding a case. It's missing the tsumet yad case. So when it comes to the responsibility to return this item, and then it says, oh, mikol asher yishav alav l'sheker. We're going to come back to this phrase also. The next pasuk says, or anything that you swore, which seems to include even things not mentioned here. Anything that you swore falsely about, what do you have to do? You remember, shilem oto barosho. You have to pay the value of the item. Chamishato Yosef alav. You add the 5th, chamishitav. And lasher usham yinenu b'yom. And by the way, you have to bring korban asham. Okay, so now let's go back to the Gemara. First they quote the first pasuk. Now they're going to define what is tsumet yad, and the Rabba is going to quote Rav Chisda, who defines what tsumet yad is. Tsumet yad, Amar Rav Chisda. I told you we're going to have a bunch of sections till we get to understanding why this is a proof. Kigon sheyiched kli lahava'ato. I loaned you money, and you promised me you pay me the money, or you give me a vessel to collect the money from. Okay, so you say, you didn't give it to me. You say you're going to give me a watch. That's what we mean by tsumet yad. What's oshet? It's not just that you promised to pay someone a salary, but you said, if I don't pay you, I'm going to give you this watch. Okay, I'm just using watch as an example. I'm going to give you this watch. It's a little different from a collateral because it seems right now that the object is in the hands of the person who promised it, who committed it, okay? Either the borrower or the one who owes the money to, right, who's hiring the workers, the employer. So yiched lo means I designated that this watch will be for you. So a collateral usually goes already to the other side. And then what happened? The person who promised this item denies that there was a loan or denies that they hired the people, and also denies that there was an object that they committed. So they deny both. Now here, they're going to point out what I already told you, which is when the pasuk then goes back and says, dichtiv, right? When the pasuk 23 reviews all the different topics and says, well, when you deny any of these claims and it turns out you were lying, and now you have to return the item. So what does it mention? You have to return. And they don't even quote the Aveda. But it didn't mention the tsumet yad. Why not? Here comes his proof. My taima lav mishum derachasra mashicha. Because it wasn't a collateral and it didn't go to the other side yet. What happened in this transaction? I loaned you money, so there was money that transferred hands. And ma'ot einam konot, according to Reish Lakish, which means that when I loan you the money and you promise me to pay from this kli, That kli did not get acquired to me because ma'odin, I'm konot. And that's why, since I didn't acquire the kli, it wasn't a completely done deal. When you deny it and lied and all that, you actually don't have to give me the kli because I never owned it. I never did mashicha. So the kli is not really mine. Okay? You probably have to return me the amount of the loan because I did loan you money. But the vessel that you promised to me is not given to me. Okay? It also seems to me like it's a little different from a collateral because it actually could be that you said I'm borrowing $100 and I'm giving you my watch, which is worth $100, and that it's actually the watch was the item you were going to return to me. But it's not acquired by me. So you might have to give me $100. You don't have to give me the watch. And that's because there was no Mashicha. That proves Mashicha is Konami Torah and not money. Now it's going to get a little complicated because comes Rav Papa and he says, Rav Papa Rava, maybe it is included because Oshek and the tsumet yad are really one and the same. So when it says that, because it's really the same kind of idea, you committed a vessel, according to Rav Chiya, right? You committed a vessel on account of payment for work done, or you committed a vessel on account of a loan. So maybe it's just included in Oshek, and that's why it didn't need to repeat it. So they say no, because Oshek is different. Oshek is a case, kigonch in others, and then, now, if you learn it from Oshek, what's the problem? It's the same idea here. There was no kinyan. In fact, there was no money even that transpired, but that's even more complicated. But there basically was no mashicha, right? So they say, oh no, you have to return the vessel. So if I denied owing you money, owing workers money for work they did for me, and I promised them a vessel, I was going to pay them with my watch. So why would I have to return the watch? Seems like there was no kinyan. Well, it must be a case in the Oshek. The reason why Oshek is mentioned in the verse is because Oshek was kigon shenatnu mimenu v'chazro v'ifkido etzlo. And why you would do this, I don't know. But I gave the workers the watch. I hired them and I gave them the watch. And I said, this is for you as payment. Like I paid them up front. And then they gave it back to me and they said, fine, very nice, you're giving it to us. But can you watch it for us? We're going out to the fields right now. We don't want to take the watch with us. So can you watch it for us? And then it went back into my possession. Okay, that's the situation here. So now there was Mashicha, right? Because they pulled it. And that's why it was Kone and not in the tsumet yad case. So they're going to have a few problems with this. Number one problem, Hainu Pikadon. Well, if they gave it to me to watch, then it's just like a Pikadon. There's no reason to mention both Pikadon in the Pasuk and this case of Oshek. So they say, no, Trey Gavne Pikadon. They're two different types. Because one, it was really my own item. I gave it to them and they gave it back to me. You can question, what do you mean? Once I gave it to them, it was theirs and that became a pikadon. But you could maybe distinguish and say it's a little bit different because it was mine a minute before and they just gave it to me to watch. And it was almost like saying, we'll take it later. So that's why it's mentioned. So they say, well, once you're going to define that that's Oshek, then Nihachi tsumet yad nami. Lihadra v'lok mekagon shenat lu'in menu v'chazar v'ifkido etzlo. Why didn't the pasuk add tsumet yad in the same way of if the whole problem they didn't add tsumet yad, why didn't they add tsumet yad? Because there was no mashicha. And Oshek, also theoretically, there was no mashicha. So why is Oshek in the pasuk? Because there was mashicha. They again, this doesn't say this ever anywhere in the pasuk. They're just saying, because it says Oshek and you have to return it, it must mean that there was a mashicha. Well, for that price, you could just say tsumet yad should have been in the pasuk, because tsumet yad, you could also have a case where the lova, the borrower, gave, right, I lent you money, you gave me the watch, and then I said, yeah, thanks, but, hold it till the end of the loan or something like that, watch it for me in your possession. So you could have had that also and added into the pasuk. So they say, if the pasuk really had mentioned both Oshek and tsumet yad instead of just Oshek, then you would say lo tiyuvta v'lo siyata. Then you would have no way of proving Reish Lakish or no way of disproving Reish Lakish. Basically because once both are mentioned in the pasuk, tsumet yad and Oshek, you could say either both are cases where there was no mashicha, and then you would say ma'ot konot, or, which would prove Rabbi Yochanan, or both are cases where there was mashicha and it would prove Reish Lakish. But since you could explain it in both ways, it's really not going to be able to be provided as not a tiyuvta, a knockout to Reish Lakish, and not as a siyata, not as a proof to Reish Lakish. But Hashta, that's all theoretical because it wasn't in the pasuk. They were just saying, had it appeared in the pasuk. But hashta, now we're going to basically return the proof from this pasuk for Reish Lakish. Hashta de lo hadrekra misayale. But since the pasuk differentiated between oshek and our case of tsumet yad and didn't mention tsumet yad in the pasuk, what are we basically going to say? Oshek is in the pasuk because there must have been mashicha, and tsumet yad is not in the pasuk because there must have not been mashicha. From there, it's either case could have really had mashicha or not had mashicha, but from the fact that one is omitted, clearly omitted, it's teaching you that there's a case that's omitted, and that would be a case where only money was given for a loan and the item wasn't pulled by the creditor, and therefore you don't have to return it because there was no mashicha, and that's going to prove Reish Lakish. So the main proof goes back to what we said originally, which is the fact that it doesn't appear in that second pasuk. There is no requirement to return it, and that's proving basically there's no requirement because ma'ot enam konot. Just getting a loan and getting the money doesn't mean that the item that you promised is committed to the other side. And that in the end is proven. To which they still have one more question. Utsumet ya lo hadre kra, but wait a minute. What do you mean it's not in Pasuk of Gimel? Now, we saw it wasn't in Pasuk of Gimel, but listen to this source. Vahatanya, it says in a braita, and I promise we come back to this Pasuk, O mikol asher yishava ala b'sheker, which says everything. And what are we going to see from that Pasuk? Well, you'll see. Amar Rabbi Shimon, minayin litenet hamor lamala lamata. How do you know that everything written in Pasuk Kaf Aleph also is included in Pasukim Kaf Gimel and Kaf Daled, which would include obviously tsumet yad, that you have to return it. Dichtiv, omi kol asher yishava alav lasheker. It includes everything. So even things not mentioned in the pasuk are as if they're mentioned in the pasuk. So you do have to return it. If you have to return it, well, if you assume tsumet yad is talking about a case where there was no mashicha, and then you have to return it. So sounds like ma'od or konod. As soon as you got the loan, then the object is already acquired by the other side, even though you didn't give it to them. Right? But Amar Rav, and if you didn't think Mikol includes that case, Rav Nachman said in the name of Rav Rabua, Amar Rav, all said in the name of Rav, Lirabot tsumet yad le'shavon. If you promise that kli in the loan and you denied the loan, denied the kli, you actually have to return, and then you admit that you lied, you have to return it. So the Gemara's simple answer is, yes, of course it's included by that pasuk, but behedya lo ahadre, mia lo ahadre kra. But in the end, it's not explicit in the pasuk, and that's where we learn it from. And this is a good point because if 3 out of 4 of the things mentioned of the topics mentioned in pasuk Kaf Aleph, 3 of them appear in pasuk Kaf Gimel and not the 4th, even if the phrase kol asher yishava will include them technically for halachic reasons, in the end, it's not mentioned explicitly. And how are we going to explain that then? That we're going to differentiate, just like in Oshek, we're going to differentiate in tsumet yad, and we're going to say tsumet yad that's not mentioned in the pasuk is the one that's not nitan lehishavon, which is there was no mashicha. And when we say kol asher yishava, which includes all cases, is only going to include tsumet yad if there was actually mashicha. And there we have a proof for Reish Lakish. So he successfully, ultimately anyway, after a bunch of difficulties with his proof, he proves from the fact that tsumet yad is not mentioned in the second pasuk, you don't need to return it, is a proof basically that if you didn't do mashicha and you just gave money, there's no kinyan. And that's because ma'ot don't acquire, you can't acquire things by Torah law through paying money. Now we're going to prove with a braita. And for here, we're going to go back to laws of me'ilah. Remember what me'ilah is. It's misuse of consecrated property by accident. So if you took consecrated property and consecrated money and used it for something, or property, but here it's going to be money, and you use it, there's me'ilah. So now let's see. We're going to talk about, it's a very interesting topic, paying for services. Okay, until now we've been talking about paying for objects. So when you pay for an object, you pay, and then it's not going to be a kinyan according to Reish Lakish until you're moshech. What if you pay for a service? There is no object. So, Ditanya, matnitin minal, I'm sorry, go back to, I skipped 2 words. Where do we get his proof from a braita? Ditanya, it says in a braita, nitana lebalan ma'al. I go to a bathhouse, and I pay the bathhouse person money, and I accidentally used consecrated money for it. When does me'ilah kick in? As soon as I pay the money. Because that's all there is. I'm paying for a service. I'm not paying for an object that I need to be moshech. I'm paying for a service that this bath attendant is now going to, warm up the water for me. That's not something tangible. The Rav explained this braita and said, Davka balanhu. The reason why they chose an example of a balan is because here the lo machasra mashicha. I'm not acquiring anything other than a service. But if it was a service that had objects associated with, like, for example, we're going to talk about this case in a second, so I'll bring it. I go to a hair cutter. Now, you would say a hair cutter, they're providing a service. But within that service, they have special implements they use. They have scissors, they have combs, they have whatever it might be that they use. Now, I'm paying for their services and the items that they're using, right? And their price is going to include not only their work, but it's also including the implements that they're using. So in that case, I'm only if I'm moshech and not chayav me'ila, which is going to be our comparison. It's the same thing of when I acquire something. I'm not going to consider acquiring the service until I pull the implements, okay, that they're using. Which again, you have to wonder why I would ever do that. It's a little weird. It's not like I'm buying them, but there has to be some connection with this. And that's what he says. If I didn't pull it, it's like missing mashicha. Lo ma'al ad mashich. I'm only going to be ma'al if I pulled something. V'hatanya. So now they say, wait, how can you possibly say that? Listen to this braita. Nitanala sapar ma'al. Now, if you give money to the barber, ma'al, there's laws of me'ila right there. Well, that just disagrees with what we just said. V'sapar habaylim imshach tisporet, because you also have to pull the implements that they use. That's what it means, tisporet. It doesn't mean the haircut, which literally in Hebrew, that's what it means. It means you have to pull the implements. So the answer, it must have been that braita is talking about if it's a Gentile sapar. If it's a Gentile sapar, as soon as I paid them, it's done. Why? Because for Gentiles, ma'od or konot. How do we know this? Because remember where we learned it from. Reish Lakish learns it from miyad amitecha, from the hand of your friend. Your friend is always, it means your Jew, your fellow Jew, not a Gentile. When it comes to a Gentile, ma'od or konot. But that doesn't mean anything about a Jew. So that source must be about a Gentile. And how do we know this? Because there's a contradictory source. Tanya namihachi, here's a braita to support that answer. Nitanala sapar ola sapan, if you gave it to the barber or to the sailor, olachol bal umanut, or any other person who is a tradesman, lo ma'al ad mashach. There's no me'ila until you pulled one of these items. So now they say kashina adade. So that contradicts the source we just read about the sapar. You do me'ila right away. So how can you resolve this? The only way to resolve it is the way we resolved it just before. One must be talking about a Jewish barber, and one must be talking about a Gentile barber. And then basically we proved the way we resolved this source. So in the end, what do we prove from here? Reish Lakish, that because there's me'ila only when you did mashicha, if there is mashicha involved, and only with the balan where there is no mashicha because there's no implements, then we're going to assume that mashicha is koneh and not ma'ot. Paying the money isn't. Now we're going to go back to Rabbi Yochanan. It says v'chein amar, as if like and just the same way so and so says, but it's talking about Rabbi Yochanan, not Reish Lakish, even though we've been on Reish Lakish. So just to summarize, okay, we brought two questions on Reish Lakish. Well, we started them both yesterday. We resolved them. We finished resolving the second one today because we had a difficulty with the resolution, but we resolved it. Then Rava brought a proof from a pasuk and a proof from a braita, and that's where we're up to. And now we have Rav Nachman who holds like Rabbi Yochanan that by Torah law, money acquires. Ubitka Levi b'matnite. Levi checked in the braitot. We kind of did a whole check in all these braitot to find a source for Rabbi Yochanan, right? Because it's always good if you can find an earlier source. Ve'eshkach, and he found it. Nitana l'siton ma'al. If you pay the middleman, someone you're a storekeeper and you buy from a middleman and you pay the money, as soon as you pay them the money, even though he hasn't given you the goods, ma'al. There's laws of me'ila kick in right then and there. That's Rabbi Yochanan, because ma'ot konot. Turning now to Amubet, elakasha the Reish Lakish. Well, then that would provide a big difficulty to Reish Lakish. So Amar Reish Lakish, Hamani Rabbi Shimon. Going back to where we started, Rabbi Shimon is a Tana who obviously holds in the same way that Rabbi Yochanan holds. So when a Tanaitic source is put up against Reish Lakish and says, oh, look, this doesn't fit with you, Reish Lakish can just say, oh, that source must be Rabbi Shimon. Don't bother me with it. And that's his answer. That is the end of that topic, which I summarized already, so we're not going to go back and summarize at the end of class. Now we're going to go to Amru Misha Para v'chulei. Now we're going to understand this Misha Para. Is it a curse like I've been mentioning until now, or maybe not? Itmar. Abaye Amal was a machloket Rava and Abaye about this. Oduye modi'inale. We just tell the person, if you renege on your word, the rabbis say to you, do you know that it's possible God will, right? We don't know what God does. It basically says the God who exacted justice on, these people will exact justice with you, and you will likely get punished. And it's a way to kind of scare you, but it's not an actual curse. Rabba Amar Melat Laitinale. Melat Laitina Lait is a curse. No, this is a curse. Okay, this curse, basically saying this curse will come upon you. So Abaye Amar doing modi'inale. What's his reason? Dechtiv v'nasiba amchalo ta'ol. It says you shouldn't curse prince among your people. Now the Gemara in Sanhedrin will get there. Darshans from this that it actually it applies to all Jews. You can't curse any Jews, and therefore, if you can't, even though it's talking about princes there, they learn there that it's everybody. Can't curse anybody. Of course, we can't give a curse to someone who does this. So therefore, since it's forbidden to curse, obviously the Mishna is not telling you curse this person. So how's Rava going to say you could curse the person? Well, Rava Amar Melat like Tina Le Dechtiv Be'amcha Bo'sema Samcha. It says Nasiba Amcha. That's only someone who's keeping to Jewish values. This person is not keeping within Jewish values, okay? And I say values specifically because it's very interesting here. You would think, what's Eno Sema Semcha? You could say someone who steals, someone who murders, someone who, does something terrible. This person just didn't keep to their word, which not even clear how bad it is, and yet we're already considering them outside the community. And therefore, this person could be cursed because they don't hold up to Jewish values of keep to your word. So therefore, they can be cursed because it's only forbidden to curse someone who's keeping within the law. I'm a Rava. Mina what's my proof, Rava says? And he's going to bring a story which is going to get us off on a different topic, which connects with our topic, but doesn't connect with this cursing or warning. I mean, it does connect, but the tangent is not going to. Here's our story. Rabbi Chiya bar Yosef, notice he's a rabbi, because he's already a knowledgeable person. That's going to be the key in his proof. He got money for salt. He was a salt dealer. He got money to buy salt from him. But he hadn't given them the money, and in the end, the price of salt goes up before he gives them the produce. Before he gives them the salt. To Rabbi Yochanan. So he goes before Rabbi Yochanan. He says, can I get out of this? Can I back out of the deal? Amar le, zial havlahu. You better give the salt to the people who paid you the money. Vihilo. If not, you're going to get this Misha Para curse. Now, how do we know it's a curse and not Oduye Odele? Because if Rabbi Yochanan is telling him, listen, I'm letting you know that, God could punish you if you do this, but he's not cursing him. Rabbi Chiya bar Yosef bar Oduyehu, he was Talmid Chacham. Of course he knew. Okay, well, you have to ask them why he asked, and we're going to get to that. But he knows that if you go back on your word, you're going to get a curse. So there's no point to tell him that. Ve'elamai. So then what? Melat Laitinale? Rabbi Chiya bar Yosef ante lekabule ele latuti de Rabbanan? Wait a minute. If he knew that you would get cursed, what? He goes to the rabbi to ask, am I going to get a curse? That also doesn't really make much sense. Ella, they're now going to say, obviously, we didn't get the full story here. Rabbi Chiya bar Yosef, eravon hu diyavele. They didn't give him all the money. Let's say they bought $100 worth of salt, and they had given him $20. Okay, all they did was give him a deposit, okay, or part of the money. Hu saval kenegdahu kones. So what did he want to do? He wanted to, that was the word I was thinking of, down payment. He wanted to renege on the $80. The $20, he was obviously going to give them salt for the $20 they gave him. And that's the topic we're going to discuss now. If somebody gives a down payment, how do we view that? So does that mean they already, you're going to get a Misha Para if you go back on the whole deal or only on the part of the $20? he was never thinking of going back on the $20. He was obviously going to give him $20 worth of salt. But Amarle Rabbi Yochanan, so he wanted to know, can I not give them the $80 though, because they didn't pay me for that yet? Amarle Rabbi Yochanan, keneged kula hu koneh. They've acquired the whole thing, Rabbi Yochanan tells them. And therefore, in other words, again, they haven't acquired it because ma'odeinam konot, but to get a misha para, they've acquired it. In other words, your deal was on the $100. They gave 20 as a down payment. That means they committed to the whole deal and you committed to the whole deal. So you can't renege on any of it. And if you renege on the 20, well, that for sure you're going to get a mishpara, but even on the 80, you're going to get a mishpara as well. And now, as I said, we're going to get off on a tangent because this is a machloket. Itmar, a ravon. I want to point out, a ravon is usually a guarantee. It's usually like a guarantor for a loan or something. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a down payment. So a down payment, Rav Amar kinegdo hu koneh, Rabbi Yochanan Amar kineged kulo hu koneh. Rav says, the only thing that's acquired here is what you paid for. And Rabbi Yochanan, which is what Rabbi Chiya Yosef was hoping Rabbi Yochanan was going to say to him. Rabbi Yochanan says, as we saw in the previous story, keneged kulo hu koneh. You've actually acquired the whole thing. Now they're going to bring a difficulty from a source, a Tanaitic source, against Rav. Meitive. Hanoten eravon lechavero. So you give a down payment. Va'amar lo, im ani chozer bi, eravoni machula. If I change my mind, okay, I renege on the deal, you'll keep my down payment. Okay? Meaning, I won't take anything from you, okay? So let's say it was the $20 here. Listen, I'm giving my down payment. If I cancel, you keep the down payment. That's by the way we usually look at down payments. That's often what happens. Now, it's different if you give a down payment on a room in a hotel, you never end up using the room. But here we're talking about you're giving the down payment. And yes, obviously I'm referring to a non-refundable down payment. You give a non-refundable down payment, often, right, you commit to something, right? And you start paying it. And usually that's the reason they take a down payment, so that they don't lose entirely on the deal, but they'll just keep your money and you won't get anything. But really think about it. If I'm paying for salt and I paid $20, and I say to you, listen, if I renege, don't give me anything. That's a little weird. You should at least keep my money and give me the $20. That's why I was saying, if it's a hotel room, it's a little bit different because I'm not planning to go to the hotel. I can't go. I got corona or something like that, right? How many times did that happen to people? And there was a whole question, can they get their money back because of corona? Can they not? But forget putting that aside. Right now, more times of war and all that. For those living abroad, you might want to know that often in hotels here now, because we're in a time of war, they actually are giving completely refundable reservations to people. I'm sure not every place, but I've heard about that. Anyway, the point is, you say, if I change my mind, I'm not going to demand anything from you. Now, this is a weird thing to promise, okay? And we're going to call it in another minute asmachta, which is, you probably didn't really mean it, because why would you say such a thing, right? Why would you commit to something ridiculous? Of course, you should at least get $20 worth of your scholat. It's not like you're canceling because you can't go to the hotel. You're canceling because you don't have the other $80. They're going to keep your money. Well, at least you should get $20 worth of salt. Halal mail, and the other side says, if I change my mind, I won't give you the salt. I will give you back your deposit and your down payment, and I'll give you double. Okay, so now we have two people who really wanted this deal to go through, and therefore they committed to something absurd, really. Okay, each one committing, if I change my mind, you'll get everything, you'll get whatever I paid you for nothing. And the other guy said, I'll even take money out of pocket, which is crazy. Someone would say that. Well, according to Rabbi Yossi, nitkaimu atnaim. Whatever they've committed to, they have to commit to. And Rabbi Yossi, divrei Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi l'ta'amei amar asmachta kan. Now, this is really an asmachta. Asmachta means you don't really mean it, okay? For whatever reason, and we'll get into asmachta later, we'll see some sugyot that talk about it. It's a very big, broad topic, a lot of details and a lot of different interpretations of it. But basically, let's just say each one was exaggerating. They didn't really mean it. Rabbi Yossi says, doesn't matter. You committed to it. You committed to it. We don't care. The general opinion is asmachta lo kanya. And that's where Rabbi Yehuda is going to disagree and said, Dayoshi knek keneged eravono. You give $20, your $20 stays no matter what, no matter who reneges. and the provider has to provide you with that amount of salt, and then it ends at the $20. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, b'meh dvarim amurim, bizman she'amar lo ervoni yikon. That's only if you specified that in the deal. And you said, my deposit that I'm giving you right now will cover, it will acquire the salt. Okay, if you use that terminology that it will do a kinyan here, then yes. Aval, but if it wasn't really like a down payment, okay, now we're going to see, you didn't specify specifically ervoni yikon, you didn't say those words, but machar lo bayit o sadeh be'elef zuz. Okay, now we're switching to a case of a house. You sold a house or a field for 1,000 zuz. Uparalo mehem 500 zuz. And you just started paying. You didn't say, I'm giving you a down payment on the house. You said, I'm just going to start paying you now. And you paid part because you didn't have all the money on hand. Kana, then the whole thing is acquired. Umachzir lo et hashar afilu lachar kama shanim. And it might take you years to pay up, but you've got to pay that up. In other words, you can't change your mind about the deal. Now, what do you see here? You see here, now Rav said, if you give an eravon, but he didn't say and said the words ervoni yikon, but you just gave it. Now that would be like the second case here that Rashbag talks about, where you just started paying and you paid part of it. Okay, you just didn't pay in full. Rav said kenegdu kona, and this says you acquired the whole thing. So now they say, well, that was land and this is movables, but the Gemara says, my lav huadin lemitaltalin, b'distama kanele lekula, which sounds like even for movables, as long as you paid some of it, you started to pay, you've committed to the whole thing. To which they say, what are you talking about? How can you compare land and movables in this issue? Because what do we know? How do you acquire land? One of the ways you can acquire land is with money. And one of the ways you acquire movables is not money. That's our whole topic. Money doesn't acquire. So they say, lo, metaltalim b'stama lo kane, umayshna, metaltalim b'stama lo kane. In other words, if it was salt, you wouldn't acquire the entire deal just because you started paying $20 worth of it. You wouldn't, right? You would acquire the 20 in salt. You wouldn't, the rest of it, you wouldn't have to commit to pay. Why is that? Mishna, what's the difference? Karka de bekasba kanele mamash, kanele lekule. Because kesef is an actual act of acquiring, as soon as you pay the money, you've committed to the entire thing. But metaltale de lo kanele lekibule mishapara. But when it comes to movable transactions, all you did was you're going to get a curse of a mishapara, or the rabbis are going to tell you, depending on whether you hold by Abaye or Rava. But let's just say a curse. Anyway, we generally hold like Rava. So let's say you're going to get a curse. You'll get a curse. But it doesn't actually mean it's acquired by you. So therefore, you're only going to have to commit to what you paid for. That's Rav's basic, right? This is not a difficulty on Rav, because Rav can explain it that way, and therefore, lo kane le lekule. You didn't acquire the whole thing. So we brought a difficulty on Rav, but then proved that you could explain this according to Rav as well, because this really isn't a difficulty on Rav. It's talking about land, which is totally different. Now they say lema ketanai. We won't really get to the full thing today, but we'll start it. Now we're going to say, is it possible that this is the same machloket between these two Tanaim? You need to know a few things. Shemitah. What happens in the Shemitah year, the 7th year? The land is fallow and all loans get canceled. Not exactly all loans, though. If, for example, one of the exceptions to the rule is, if you gave me collateral for the loan and I have the collateral in my hand, it's as if I collected the loan already. So therefore, the loan isn't canceled because I can still collect it. I can give you back your collateral and get the loan because it's not really like a loan right now because I have the collateral. What if the collateral doesn't match the amount of the loan, though? That's going to be the question here. So you gave me collateral, and then the Shemitah year comes in. Even if it's only worth half, then the loan's not canceled. Now we're going to have to see later is just the part that if you gave me $500 out of 1,000, does that mean only 500 isn't canceled, but the rest of it is? Or does it mean the whole thing? And we're going to have to see what this machloket is. So that's all going to be tomorrow. That's Divrei Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Omer, if it was the exact amount, $1,000 loan, $1,000 collateral, eno mishamet. Then it's as if you collected the loan already. Im lav, but if not, mishamet, then it's as if the collateral doesn't cover it, so therefore it's as if there's no loan. Now, again, we're going to have to see no complete loan or no half loan. So we're going to have to get into this tomorrow. we'll stop here and then explain their machloket and try to see, is this the same machloket between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan about the Erev bones? So what we did on the second part of today's daf, number one, Mishpara, we saw machloket, Rav and Abaye, is it a curse or is it just telling them? Rav tried to prove from the story of Rabbi Chiya bar Yosef, but we kind of said, no, there's a different way to understand that story. And that got into this whole thing that was, he had given a partial payment, a deposit, a down payment on the item. And his question was about the rest of it, the part he hadn't gotten the money for. And therefore, maybe that's not connected at all. And then we got into this whole machloket, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, and then we brought a difficulty on Rav. We resolved it. And now we're trying to figure out, is it also a Tannaitic debate about whether if I paid down payment on something, did I link it to the whole thing to the extent that I will now get a mishpara, I will get cursed if I renege, or can I renege on the part I haven't yet paid for? And is the mishpara only on the part I paid for? That's the machloka between them. Rabbi Yochanan, as we saw from the previous story, says, no, I committed to the entire thing. And if I renege on the rest of it, I actually will get a mishpara. Rav thinks not. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and Shabbat Tovot.